Hello and welcome to English Digest. I'm Seb.
And I'm Elsie.
And we are recording this just a little while after Chinese New Year, aren't we? We just got back from the break.
So how was your Chinese New Year vacation?
It was good. It was relaxing. I had a lot of exams in January, and so I was very tired when Chinese New Year came around, and so I really enjoyed just relaxing, taking it easy. I didn't really see my family, but I'm hoping to see them soon, so it's okay.
So when was the last time you visited your family in the UK?
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yes, or over 2 years ago now. It was in 2019. So I'm planning to go back soon for a little while and spend some time catching up with them now that I've got my vaccination. So how was yours? How was your Chinese New Year break?
I gathered together with my family and we went back to Kaohsiung to visit my grandma.
Yes, your family home is in Kaohsiung.
Right, my dad's family.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I want to talk a little bit about going back to your roots. Now, going back to your roots, that phrase basically means returning to your place of origin or returning to something you originally studied or something you were originally interested in. So that is what going back to your roots is. And basically, the reason I'm bringing this up and the reason that we're talking about this is because of today's picture writing assignment. So today's picture writing assignment does seem to have a kind of going back to your roots kind of feel, or that's what I get from it.
Yeah, and there is a grandma in the picture too.
Exactly, there is a grandma in the picture too. So let's talk briefly about today's topic and instructions. So today's topic is, or today's instructions are, look closely at the photo below and write a passage of at least 120 words describing the people, objects, or what is happening in the photo, and how the situation might develop. Your passage should have a logical structure and clear conclusion.
OK, 所以今天的提示呢，给的是请仔细观察下方图片的内容，写出一篇120个字以上的文章，来描述图中的人、事物以及可能的发展。那文章呢，需要有合理的发展和完整的结局哦。So what do you see in this picture, Seb, besides this grandma?
Yes. Well, she might not be a grandma, but she might just be an old lady. We can see an old lady. We can see a young boy. And I think that's a laptop, a portable computer that they have in front of them.
有一个笔电在他们的前方 and there's a basket next to the old woman?
Right, there is a woven basket there as well. We can also think a little bit about the setting, okay? So the place or where they are. So it doesn't look like an urban setting, does it? It doesn't look like a city.
I think they're in the countryside.
It does look like the countryside. Maybe it is a farm. Maybe they're sat outside in a farmer's field or something like that. I think if we think about the relationship between these two people, it looks like they're grandmother and grandson.
Yeah, they might be grandma and grandson.
Yes, that's what I see from this. So what do you think might be happening here? What might be going on between them?
I think the kid is trying to share some interesting stuff with his grandma here.
Perhaps. Yeah, maybe he's teaching his grandma how to use the computer, or maybe he's showing his grandma something he did on the computer.
Or they are maybe checking some old photos on a laptop.
Yes, they could be looking at old photos together. So this picture, it's saying a lot of different things, and our assignment today is to write a passage of 120 words about this picture. And as I said, you can start from wherever you like. So you can start from this picture and talk about what happened next. You can talk about what is happening in this picture, or you can talk about the background. You can talk about what happened up until this picture. This could be the ending of your story. So there's a lot that you can do with this picture. So I think we should begin by developing an approach, and then we can start to turn this into a great story.
好的，那单图式的看图写作呢，想象空间会比较大一些，也没有时间顺序的限制，可以将这张图片当作起点，也就是原因、过程或是结果、 结论的部分也可以。那单图是看图写作常见的写作步骤如下。第一个要注意的是呢，仔细观察图片的内容，人事时地物。好，刚刚我跟 Seb 都讨论过了。那解读图片所要传达的讯息之后呢，设定整篇故事所要表达的主旨，并且决定这张图片是起承转还是合。那第二个就是要根据主旨运用想象力或推理来串联整个情节哦，说一个和图片相关、合理而且生动精彩的故事。
So I don't know about you, Elsie, but I'm quite excited about this assignment because we get a lot of creative freedom here.
Me too.
So creative freedom is where you get to be very creative with a project. You get to do lots of different things with a project. You don't have to write this story in a certain way. You can write any kind of story you like so long as it has a logical development to or from this picture. Okay, so you have a lot of freedom to write the story that you want to write. So why do I say this? Well, because we can write this story in many different ways. You know, even if we just think about perspective, even if we just think about who is telling the story, we could be telling it from the boy's point of view or the old lady's point of view, or we could tell it from the point of view of a third person, someone who isn't in the picture. Maybe the boy's mum is in the farmhouse and she was there a moment ago. We don't know. We can add that kind of information in. So that is a good question to be asking yourself at this point. Who do you think is the most important character in this story? Who should be your protagonist? Who should be your 主角？
对，所以决定主角也是非常重要的。那再来呢，所有写作方式不论分段与否都必须要起承转合。那一般建议呢，至少文分两段，让内容的呈现更为清楚。
Exactly. So we need to have a very clear and logical structure. As we're writing a narrative piece for a short story, we need to follow a storytelling structure. In other words, we need a beginning, a middle, a twist, or a surprise, and an end. Okay, so let's just look at that word twist here. When we're talking about twists or surprise, we're talking about an interesting development that is not expected in the story. Okay, so your introduction can, explain the setting, what's going on, what's happening between them. Maybe the middle can develop that a little bit, say a bit about what is probably going to happen next. But when you get to your twist, you might want to throw in a bit of extra information. So perhaps this boy is about to go away to school in the city and he's not going to see his grandmother again. And this is his last weekend with her, for example. That's a bit of a twist. It adds unexpected information to this picture.
没错，所以 twist 就是我们说起承转合里面的转的部分。那再来呢，图片写作多于叙述已发生的事件哦，所以呢，时态原则上就是以过去式的系列来表示，过去式、过去完成式、过去的未来式。另外为了方便叙述，可以命名图片当中的主要人物，并选择适合的人称，提供叙述的角度。
Exactly. So, for example, we could tell this story from the point of view of the old woman. We could write in the first person if we are saying that we are the old woman. So, we're writing it through the eyes of the old woman, we could say. Or we could, and in that case, we could be maybe remembering her first time using a computer. We could be writing in the I form and writing in the past tense, maybe, she's remembering how one of her neighbor's kids taught her how to use a computer for the first time. And so we would write in I verbs and we would use the past simple, which honestly I think is the easiest thing to do, is to use the past simple for this story, because normally when you write stories you use the past simple. But we can use other points of view as well. And I think we are going to go in our brainstorming section. So shall we go straight into brainstorming now?
Sure. 同一张图片呢，透过不同的叙述角度，那会有不同的 point of view， 会带给读者截然不同的感受哦。那建议你在下笔之前，可以先思考一下哪一种叙事安排最能够让你的故事流畅的传给读者，到底要用 first person、second person 还是 third person？
Exactly. So to review, let's talk about what point of view can be. So point of view is obviously who is telling the story, okay? So sometimes when you read a story, the story is told by one of the characters. Sometimes it's told by someone who's not in the story, a narrator, and sometimes it's told as if you, the reader, are one of the characters. And so depending on how we do this, we change the way that we use verbs, okay? So we have three kinds of points of view, basically. The first person, the second person, and the third person. So the first person is using I verbs, as I was just saying with the grandmother. So if we're saying that we're writing it as if we are the grandmother, then we would write in I verbs. I was sat on my farm and I was using a computer with the neighbor's kids, for example. That would be an example of using first person in your story. Second person is different. When we're talking about the second person, we use you verbs. So we're getting the reader to imagine being one of the characters themselves. So you are sat on a farm in the Philippines and it's a beautiful sunny day and you are sat with your grandson using the computer. That's the second person.
So that means you want your readers to imagine?
Yes, it invites them to imagine it. We're going to be talking a little bit more about first, second, and third person in a second. And the third person is telling it from a outside point of view, so telling it through the eyes of a narrator. A narrator is a storyteller, and normally in stories when you, like for example, Harry Potter is told not through the eyes of Harry Potter, but from somebody just outside the story that's told through the eyes of a narrator. So while we're brainstorming our ideas, we can begin to think about which one of these perspectives we're going to use. And if you look at the graphic in the magazine, you can see a more detailed run-through of what first person, second person, and third person mean.
没错，那人称的部分，像是第一人称，我们就会用到怎么样的 pronouns。代名词呢，我们会用 I 或 we。那如果是第二人称，用的就是 you。好，你在跟你的读者说话哦。在第三人称的话呢，你会用到 he, she or they。那你会介绍比较多的观点，好让你的读者更了解那些人在转换之间的情绪啦，或是他们的意见。
Exactly. So the graphic is very useful because it gives us a better idea of why we might want to use different kinds of points of view. So the first person, it says, is good when the story involves more of the woman's or the boy's personal feelings and experiences. Often when you write in the first person, you can say a lot more about what someone is thinking and their experiences.
那再来我们看到 second person 这个图表上面写的是呢，除了要记得用 you 好来跟读者说话之外呢，什么时候可以用它 ？When you want your readers to be more personally and emotionally engaged in the story.
Exactly.
You want them to think about it. You want them to imagine what's going on.
Exactly. In fact, if you're writing things like blogs or you're writing other kinds of, not stories, but kinds of content that are good for explaining how to do something or showing that you know a lot about a subject, the second person is very good because it's very clear and it's good for giving instructions. Thirdly, the third person is, it says here, when you want to show both people's thoughts and feelings by switching perspectives. So switching perspectives means at one point you're telling things kind of from the old woman's point of view. You might talk about what she's thinking and how she sees things. And at other times, you might be talking about the boy and how he sees things. So readers are able to interpret things from different perspectives. So actually, I'm reading a different book right now, and that one does this a lot. It has some chapters where it's talking about things as one sister in a family sees them. And in the next chapter, it switches and suddenly you're inside the head of the other sister. So you see how two different people know things, how they experience things. And that can make the story really interesting. So there's not a best perspective to use, really, as it's more about what you think is right for the story you want to tell.
So when you write stories, which way do you prefer? Personally, I prefer third person point of view.
I normally use third person as well at the moment. I don't write a lot of stories, but when I do, I think it's a good one to start with. In fact, here it says that it's good for basic sample because that's the kind of stories we normally write.
And it's easier.
It's easier. It is easier. You don't have to switch perspectives as well. That's important. If you think that you have a good story that would be better with the point of view of the old lady and the young boy, then you can use a perspective switch. But if you think it's easier to just talk about the old lady or just talk about the boy, then you don't need to do that. It's just a good extra thing that you can include. Okay, let's move on now to our outline. So, we need to organize our thoughts into an outline, and that's basically a plan of all the things that you want to say that will help you write a really well-structured passage. I personally still write an outline every time I write anything. So if I'm writing articles, if I'm writing stories, even if I'm just writing reports for school, I will always use an outline. And that's because sometimes you have so many things you want to say, you know. You're talking about a topic you are really excited about and you've done lots of research, or you're telling a story that you think is really interesting and there's lots of exciting things you can do. But you look at that blank piece of paper and you're not sure what to put down on the page. You know, where do I start? How do I tell this story well? An outline is going to help you do that really efficiently and really clearly so that you enjoy writing it and the reader enjoys reading it. So let's take a look at the sample that we have in our magazine. Okay, so our first paragraph begins with a topic sentence. And remember, your topic sentence is normally the first sentence in your paragraph. It is the one that basically says what this paragraph is going to be about. Okay, so for example, Francisco hadn't seen his grandmother in months. Okay, so we know right away that we're going to talk about things from the boy's perspective, okay, the little boy. And we have some background immediately. It tells us that we're going to be talking about his relationship with her, or maybe what happened before he came back for this picture to be taken. So it continues, he had left home to begin attending school in the city the previous autumn. It was an opportunity he was excited to take. He realized he really missed his family after some months. He headed home for spring break with a different kind of excitement. Okay, so a couple of things to note here. The first one is that you should write your outline with very simple sentences. Don't waste your time writing really fancy things for your outline because you're just trying to get your ideas out. So if you look at these sentences, they're very easy and very simple. The second thing is that he uses the past perfect tense to talk about the background of the image. Because they're writing the whole story in the past simple, we need to use the past perfect, that's had done or had been or had gone to talk about things that happened before the story took place. So before he went and saw his grandmother, he was at school. He left to go to school. And that's why we say he had left home to begin attending school the previous autumn. So I can imagine this story of a kid going away to the city and then coming home to see his grandmother is something that maybe a lot of children in Taiwan from rural areas can relate to, right? Because quite a lot of kids from rural places go to school in the city and then go back to the countryside in their school break, right, Elsie?
I think so. Mm-hmm. So they must be really excited when they are able to go back to their grandparents or even parents.
Exactly.
Right. 那再来呢，介绍完背景之后，我们就要来看到第二个主题句，带出图片当下发生的事情哦。好，那时态呢，我们就用过去式就好了。那这边的主题句第二句 Francisco arrived home and went outside with his laptop to look for his grandmother. 他很开心回来之后呢，就赶快拿着他的电脑去跟他的 grandmother 见面。He found her in the fields up the hill from the house. He wanted to show his grandmother what he'd been learning. She sat beside him and smiled to see her grandson's excitement. 所以这里 they talk more about their feelings and emotions.
They do, and if you look in the fourth sentence, there is a perspective switch. Okay, so until the end of the second paragraph, we're talking about the boy's excitement, his experiences in school. But at the end, it says she sat beside him and smiled to see her grandson's excitement. So suddenly we're seeing things through the eyes of the grandmother, which is, it's very touching because we can see that both of them are really excited to see each other, and there's a lot of love in this photo. And I think one thing I really like about it is that it used that little detail of the picture, the fact that they're smiling at each other, to add more interesting information to the story, which I think is a great way of using small things in that picture to add important details to your story.
没错，人物的 facial expressions 他们的表情你也是可以写进去的，可以利用这一点来让你的文章更有一些感情，然后呢更有一些丰富性。
Exactly. And so our concluding sentence is Francisco's grandmother would enjoy spending time with him while he was back at home. Okay, so here again we're now seeing things through the eyes of the grandmother, and they use the conditional tense here. Would enjoy spending time with him. So we can tell that she's thinking this. She's thinking, yes, I'm going to have a really great time with my grandson now that he's back for the spring break. So, very nice story, and I imagine that we could continue the story if we had time. It sounds like the start of a short story, actually, that could be about this grandmother and her grandson during a school holiday visit. What do you think could have happened later, Elsie?
Okay, so I think maybe later the kid will start teach his grandma something new or share with her something that he had learned at school.
Yes. Or maybe he could have learned lots of things at school and his grandmother reminds him of some important things from his hometown. So he learns about maybe some traditions or, it could go either ways.
Yeah.
This story could develop in lots of different ways. Okay, let's take a quick break here, and then when we're back, we will read through the basic and advanced samples. Basic sample. Francisco hadn't seen his grandmother in months. In the autumn of the previous year, he had left his family's home in the countryside to begin attending school in the city. It was an opportunity he was excited to take, but as the months wore on, he realized how much he missed his family. As he headed home for spring break, he was filled with a different kind of excitement. When he arrived, Francisco greeted his parents, then pulled out his laptop and headed outside in search of his grandmother. He found her in the fields up the hill from the house. Francisco wrapped her in a hug, and she asked him what he was carrying. "It's my school laptop," he answered. "I want to show you what I'm learning." She sat on the ground beside him and smiled to see her grandson's excitement. She would enjoy spending time with him while he was back at home. Okay, so yeah, it's a very sweet story. I can see how they've really added a lot of nice little details that add a lot more color to Francisco's family visit. So I think one of the phrases I really like here is the phrase wrap in a hug. Now, this is very descriptive language. We don't normally use this, texting our friends. But wrapping basically is when you cover something completely in paper, fabric, or a blanket. So you could wrap yourself up in a blanket when you're cold, or you could wrap a Christmas present, for example. Those are ways you can use wrap. When you wrap someone in a hug, we get the idea that you're kind of completely surrounding them in your arms. You're giving them a really warm, tight hug, and you're sharing a very warm moment together. So it's a very touching image that we get from this phrase. Okay, shall we move on and look at the advanced sample?
Sure.
Advanced sample. You remember warm spring days visiting your grandmother on her farm. She was always glad to set aside her tasks in favor of spending time with you, and never withheld her attention. You told her tales of the adventures your stuffed animals had at the edges of her carefully cultivated fields, and cautiously shared your plans for your own adventures when you grew up. Through her patient listening and tender encouragement, you grew confident in your ability to fulfill the goals you had set for yourself. You knew you could rely on her love for you no matter what aims you chose to pursue or how far from her they took you. Now, as you hold this photograph in your hands, you feel a flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm you. You think you recall this specific day 20 years ago. It was soon after your birthday. You had been so eager to show her the expensive gift your parents had given you. She paused in her task of gathering fresh vegetables for dinner and watched your energetic explanation of all the features of your newest electronic toy. She didn't care about the marvelous capabilities of the laptop itself. She just took delight in your joy. You slip the photo into your pocket as you head to the car where your mother is waiting to drive you to the hospital. You can show your grandmother the photo when you arrive. She'll like that. You just know it. Okay, so in this one, we're telling the story from the future. We're telling it from much later on, right? We're imagining that this boy is probably grown up. He's a man now. It's been 20 years.
And he's looking back at that specific day with his grandma.
Exactly. He's remembering a long time ago when he was with his grandmother.
I like a lot of words here.
It is. There's a lot of very...
descriptive words?
Very descriptive, quite poetic vocabulary. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get through all of it. I just want to look at one word, overwhelm. Now, when something overwhelms you, it's too much for you emotionally or physically or mentally. So here we're talking about being overwhelmed by emotions, a flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm you. A lot of emotions which might make you, might be too much for you. They might make you cry. They might make you stressed out, for example. I think here it's crying because he misses his childhood and those memories with his grandmother. So we can use overwhelm in lots of different ways. A similar one could be having to care for her younger siblings has really overwhelmed Wilma this week. Okay, so we're imagining that it's too much work for Wilma. She's got too much to do and she's very stressed or very tired. Another might be Jamie feels overwhelmed with her schoolwork right now. And that's talking about being overwhelmed mentally. And lastly, the soldiers quickly overwhelmed the castle. And in this last one, we're talking about a physical situation. We're talking about there being lots of soldiers coming into the castle and taking control of it physically.
OK, 所以 overwhelm 代表就是使人家难以承受，那可能是情绪，可能是事件。那这边用的一个很漂亮的地方是 feel a flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm you，让你很难以承受这些情绪大量的涌上来。好啦，那我们就要 say goodbye 了 right?
Yes, it's time to say goodbye, unfortunately. But we will be back in April with even more exciting writing assignments. So it won't be for long. We will see you then. For now, I'm Seb.
I'm Elsie.
And we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.